How's it going? In this video, I'd like to talk about Plato's Apology. Now, it's actually the Apology of Socrates. And in this text, Socrates is on trial for three things. First thing is he's being charged with corrupting the youth. Now, in this, you would probably say that he has been proposing that the young, by his own example, do philosophical thinking, and basically questioning accepted values. They actually forming questions to people. Why do you believe this? Why is this? Why? The second charge is he's charged with being an atheist. Now, I don't think that like Socrates explains himself that he's not an atheist. He does believe in the gods, as we'll discuss later. But he generally does not follow accepted views on Greek religion. And that is much to the annoyance of other people because he's basically doing his own thing. It's not very predictable. And the third thing that he is being charged with is making the worse appear the better cause. Now, I guess in the end you would call this sophistry. And I guess you could explain this that he's annoying people with asking them questions about why they believe things. Again, why? What is justice? Well, justice is this. Well, why is that justice? And asking them again and again, and it just pisses them off to no end. But he's also pointing out that people's ideas are based on flawed thinking or just non-thinking. They're just going with the accepted view on things, and they're not actually using their brain. They're just they're doing it by received information. Now, I'm not going to go through the details on this, but I wanted to talk about some takeaways. What, when you read this, or at least when I read this, what I take away from it. Now, there's probably just a handful of things I'd like to talk about in this one. And one of them is that he creates this thing called the Socratic method. And we use this today. And basically what he does is he asks a question or a topic will come up about love. What is love? And the person he's discussing this with give an answer, and he will ask the questions. Essentially, he's picking apart their ideas, their way of thinking, and when he asks these questions, the other person will often give answers that contradict themselves. They just don't make any sense, or they're just not applicable to the situation at hand. And it usually ends up with no resolution. Now, sometimes, depending on the dialogue in other books, it can build to a conclusion or a couple of conclusions, but in the end, it shows most of our thoughts are based on emotion or tradition or just something else that isn't philosophy or it isn't rationality. Now, some people will be very angry with him, and some people are very eager to find out what the right way of thinking is. And obviously, the Socratic method pisses off people because they don't get answers or they're being contradicted. And people don't like being proved wrong out in public. Another takeaway is this idea of the Oracle of Delphi. Now, the Oracle of Delphi is essentially a priestess at the temple of Apollo in Delphi, which is a city about 30-40 miles from Athens. Now, driving, you could probably get there in an hour or so, but back then, it was a big trip to go there. It's sort of a pilgrimage, and people would go there, and if you gave the oracle, the priestess, a bit of money, she would answer a question for you, as basically the conduit of the god Apollo, who's pretty much a god of, well, pretty much everything. He's one of the major gods. And so his friend asks, who's the wisest man in the world? And the answer comes back, and it's Socrates. And his friend comes back and tells him this. And he just can't believe it. He knows that Apollo wouldn't lie, but he knows that he's not that wise. So he figures it's a challenge to find out who actually is wise. So he goes around talking to people who claim to be wise or are said to be wise, and he comes up with three groups. there are politicians. He talks to a bunch of them, and he figures out that they're just blowhards. They're so self-centered. They tell people what they want to hear, and they're not wise at all. They constantly contradict themselves. He talks to poets, and that they will say things that are seemingly wise, but when he asks for clarification, what did you mean by in this verse, blah blah blah, they don't even understand what they've just said. So they either are conduits of ideas, fonts of divine inspiration in a form of poetry, but they actually aren't very wise in and of themselves. And the third group are craftsmen or artisans, and they actually know their own craft, so they are wise to some extent, but they believe that since I'm wise in carpentry, therefore I'd make a good politician. Well, some fields just don't translate into other fields. Sometimes you can. There is some sharing of knowledge between fields, but be careful if you step over the mark there. So in the end, he sees that these people aren't very wise at all, and he says, well, your uncle says I'm wise. I know I don't think I am. So it must be because I don't think I am. I'm pretty sure I'm not. These guys think that they are. So they're even wrong about being wise. So at least I'm correct in knowing that I'm not wise. So, I mean, we get this idea that all I know is that I know nothing. That's probably the highest form of wisdom, is just not being arrogant in your knowledge. And another takeaway I would say is that, well, in the end, that he is convicted of all three of these charges, and he is faced with execution unless he stops philosophy. Well, you could also say stop harassing people around Athens, and he decides that, well, live my life without philosophy means I can't ask questions about what's good and bad, and what love is, and what's virtue and vice, and all these subjects. He's like, I don't want to live that way. That's not a life that's worth living. He's like, I'm too old to go somewhere else and live this life, and most places wouldn't even accept me there. But I'm too afraid actually to piss off the gods, who have charged me with finding out what wisdom is. And so I'd rather piss off the people of Athens and die than to face eternal damnation in places like Tartarus, which is the Greek version of hell. I'd rather piss you off than the gods. So I'm going to go on and continue doing this. And so they sentence him to death. Now, you think, well, how does this relate to me? So you have to ask yourself, well, is life, without thinking about what is good or what is bad, what makes, what is virtue, what is vice, how to live your life, is that a good life to think, not to think about those sort of things? It can be heavy and it can be burdensome, but to go around without any sort of inkling or even desire for an inkling of this knowledge seems a pretty grim life. Because if you think about this, you have to ask yourself, well, am I using faculties that have been given to me by God or nature or your parents? Am I using these? Well, maybe physically, but you're not really using your mental faculties, which really separate us from the animals. So you have to think, am I improving myself for my own sake and for the sake of others around me? And really, what is the difference between living life without philosophy and being an animal? Essentially, you're just going around like an automaton, but you're not thinking about good things and bad things and love and virtue and all of these these philosophical topics, exploring these themes. That we are rational beings, that we have the ability to think about these things. We should develop and hone this rationality to use as a tool to improve our lives. Because if we find a way to find out what is good, then we can treat other people well. If we can find out a way what is bad, we can find out how not to treat other people. And this rationality also develops tools like science, which basically, you can use to go to the moon, heal sick people. You can use logic in order to develop all these other tools. You can use economics of, well, how should I spend my money? How should we allocate resources? How should I spend my time? What is the most efficient way of living my life? You need your rationality. In order to develop that, you need to use philosophy. So in the end, this whole text is really about you should live your life using philosophy. So that's about all I've got for you today. I will see you in another video. See you soon. Bye.